My guest today joins me with decades of teaching experience, Teacher of the Year award in the state of California, and multiple book publications. I'd like to introduce Dr. Edward Mooney Jr.
Oh, thank you, Bill. It's very kind of you to point those things out. Um, yeah, it's been a long time. I've seen education change quite a bit throughout my career. I started teaching at McFarland High School, and you may have heard of the movie called McFarland USA. It was about runners, and I was one of the teachers there when those things happened at the beginning of my career. And the movie's not about me, but I knew the runners really well. So that was, that'll tell people how long I've been in education.
Went through a lot, experienced a lot through those experiences, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, you've taught high school, you've taught many grades, what subject?
Licensed in science and social studies, and taught both sides depending on what the principal used to need at the time. Remember one time a principal called me in 2 days before school started and said, "By the way, you're teaching physics this year." I'm like, "What?"
Physics.
And he said, "I noticed on your transcript that you took the full set of college physics classes in college." And I said, "Well, you had to get a Bachelor of Science degree, but that doesn't mean I'm a physicist." But I really enjoyed teaching that. I mean, the neat thing about teaching, if you're really into it, is I use that as an opportunity to learn more, to expand my knowledge. And I came to really, really love physics. And the next year, they got a new physics teacher, so I was done. But
You
yeah,
said you started to like it, huh?
yeah, and I think that's the one thing that keeps me in education is I still love to learn. I really make sure all my students know that I'm still a learner. And like when I was doing my doctorate, I put all my papers up on my bulletin board, and they could see what my professor said about things. And they've got to see that we're not perfect. We're all trying to move forward, I call it. So, yeah,
Nice. Lifelong learning. Yeah, I like
that's
that.
right,
I can
exactly.
relate. I can relate. Well, the writing, when did that start? How long have you been writing?
Um, that started in the early 90s. Um, and my wife was pregnant with my son. And I I grew up with an abusive alcoholic father. So the idea of becoming a father it's always been scary to me because it's like, what is a good father? I don't know. By the way, I had a number of men I drew on them in terms of memories to what fathers would do. And so I decided to write a book. I call it Toy Jeeps, A Father's Legacy. It's another manuscript I'm trying to get published. And it kind of chronicles, it's a memoir of sorts or autobiography. I'm not sure which one it is. But it details what I went through it starts from when I was like 3 years old. And it starts in the present. And I'm a new dad and I have a nightmare. And then it goes back to when I'm three. It's like, what do they call that? A framed story or something like that. And I go back to when I'm three and I just recount chapter by chapter little vignettes through my life all the way up till I've graduated from high school. And then we come back to the present part that started at the beginning. And it kind of, you can maybe get a feeling for why I struggled to be a father because I'm just really, I didn't have much of a good example. But that was the first book I ever wrote. And
Wow, I can very much relate to the subject matter. It sounds a lot like my the Punk the Professor. Punk and
yes, I
Professor
saw that.
was my
Yes.
first novel, very much autobiographical, almost a memoir, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I can relate there. So that was the very first one you wrote, and you're still looking to publish that though.
Yeah, I did have a publisher back in the 90s, and while they were doing it, they went out of business.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like, oh, darn. Um, Strangely, the reason I didn't push it after that was in the 90s, I reached out to my father and we kind of, I don't know, tacked together a reasonably working relationship. And I didn't want to throw fire on that. So I decided to put that one in the closet, and he passed in 2004. By then I'd written a couple other books and I was busy with them. And so in the last few years, I've been trying to find a publisher or agent to get that published. I'm hoping soon. I got 3 or 4 projects I'm putting out before agents and publishers right now.
Wow, wow, all different, all fiction.
No, 1, 2, 3 works of fiction, and I am working on something called the Trauma Cascade in Education. I've been very closely attached to the Trauma Research Foundation in Boston, which is headed by Bessel van der Kolk, MD, studying and understanding trauma. And I came to see through all my decades of teaching that we have a hidden player in every classroom called trauma. And I mean player in terms of, have you ever been on a bumper car ride? If you remember those, you're running around in this thing and everybody's on these little cars banging into each other. Well, the classroom is like that bumper car ride, and we're all banging into each other's traumas, and that includes teachers. And we don't know what's going on. And some people, it gets so overwhelming that they leave, they get off the ride. And that to them, what that means is kids drop out of high school or teachers quit teaching high school. And I really have come to see through all my years that we don't talk about this very much, this banging around of bumper cars called trauma. There are a lot of times when I was a teacher that I noticed certain kids would kind of irritate me or cause me discomfort more than other kids. And this is what the book recounts is how did that happen? Why did that happen? And I came to see there were patterns. And I can recount a number of other stories teachers have told me that I look, I went, oh my gosh, we all have this, and we don't realize it. I did realize one time I was a teacher and I had a very demanding woman principal. Now, most of my women principals I did fine with, but this one I couldn't handle. And of course, being the one who's looking back into my psychological makeup, I realized that she very much reminded me of my mother, who was very, very demanding, very controlling, and stuff like that. And, I went, oh my gosh, there's another example of how trauma affected my ability to work in my classroom. I could go on. I have, I think, 50 vignettes in this book describing little moments of trauma. And I try not to point them out. You're the writing type, so you understand. I'm trying to tell the story without shining a light right on it to say, oh, look, here was the trauma. I want people to read through it. And then at the end of each vignette, I ask a couple of hopefully pointed questions so they could see what I call the hidden force in education. In education, we're really into trauma-informed teaching and things like that. But what we're not aware of is we brought our own in there. And that's the biggest thing I'm trying to work with. So that's the nonfiction work. I have another nonfiction that's kind of in the early stages of development after that. But I got my hands full with especially 2 novels and this one nonfiction work that I'm working on. I don't write as fast as I used to. You get bogged down in life.
That'll happen, yeah. Well,
So
teachers really they do go through a lot just being in the classroom. But what you're saying is also they're bringing a lot of their past into the room, and that's affecting the students as well.
they're bringing in their past and their present. Um,
Their home life, yeah,
their
whatever
home life.
home.
One of the things I learned, I just was certified by Bessel van der Kolk in trauma psychology, is that trauma is not about what happened a long time ago. It's how it affects you, your ability to live your life today. And so I'm literally saying that the trauma is still alive inside of you. One of the things he talks about is that trauma isn't just, a lot of people will say to me, well, why can't people just get over trauma? Well, because it's not in the prefrontal cortex here. It's in the brainstem. It's in the limbic system, the amygdala, the lizard brain, some call it, which is the reactive brain, the defensive, keep myself safe brain. And so that's still alive, even though I faced terrible physical abuse from my father a long time ago. I won't say how many years. Um, I'm still struggling with what's going on in my lower nervous system. By the way, I've been through therapy. I do recommend, CBT is good, but there are things like EMDR and IFS, and there are numerous therapies. They're even working on MDMA and ketamine drug therapy for severely abused people, which shows incredible promise to heal people with severe trauma memories. But getting back to what you said, we've got to acknowledge that the trauma is right here, right now, living in this body and in anything I go out and do. And strangely, I have been looking at people since I've become educated on this, is I realized that explains a lot of things. And when people say, why does that person act like that? Well, obviously they may be feeling threatened or unsafe is the key concept I've discovered. Feeling safe. Somebody asked me as an educator, educational psychologist, what could you do for a lot of your kids are going through traumas? What can you do for them? Well, remember that there's one key. It's called make sure they feel safe. Your classroom is a safe place for them. If you're an administrator, your school is a safe place for them. They're not going to get hurt here. It's difficult to go into the family and fix those things, but you can take care of them while they're at school. I've done that for most of my career. I had uh, well, one example, and tell me if I'm droning on, but when I was in high school, my father put me in the emergency room one night, and I didn't get out till like 3 in the morning, and I don't remember what time, but the doctor said, I think it'd be best if you stay home today. Now, for me, that was a nightmare. My father was drunk at home. Why would I? So I said, no, I'm going to school. And I went to school. And of course, I'm carrying, as I just described, that baggage, that trauma baggage into school with me. And I got into my first period class, and my math teacher was walking along saying, let me see your homework. Now, if you remember Algebra 2, oh, I'm not a math person, but you do 5 problems, it takes you half the night kind of thing. And I had done like 2 of them. And she came by and looked at my paper. I said, I did 2. I was really tied up last night. You don't want to admit what you went through to the middle of the public, but I can maybe get the rest to you at the end of lunch. I'll wait right outside your classroom. And she tore into me. She put me down, called me a waste, things like that. And I got a little upset about it. And she sent me to the vice principal. And Mr. McCracken, who I kind of knew me and he knew her. And he said, what's going on? I said, I had a bad night last night and I couldn't finish my homework. And he was very kind to me, thank God for Mr. McCracken. And he said, why don't you go to your second period and just get through the day? And I went to the second period. And it was Mr. Schroeder and Lowell Schroeder. And I sat there, and I think about this when I'm a teacher. When I see kids walk in and they kind of put their head down or things like that, I'm always like, okay, something's going on here. And Mr. Schroeder came over and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, are you okay, Ed? And I said, no, I'm having a really bad day. I'm thinking I'm going to drop out of high school. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I just can't handle it anymore. It's just too much for me. I don't want to do this anymore. It's just overwhelming. And he said, well, what will you do? And I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And I said, I'm going to get my car and move to Alaska. And this was in Southern California, by the way. So Mr. Schroeder had a sly smirk on his face. And he said, how much money do you have in your wallet? I said, what? I said, how much money do you have in your wallet? So I opened my wallet. I said, I got $9. And he smiled and he said, so what will you do with all the extra money when you get to Alaska? And I said, that won't go very far, would it? And he went, I don't think so. He said, I'll tell you what, why don't you stay with me the whole day? And I'll call your teachers and we'll work something out because you're having a really hard day today. And I did not tell him what had happened. And he did that for me. And each day he asked me, are you okay today? That kept me in school. I graduated, got a bachelor's, master's, doctorate, the whole 9 yards, because I think of those days, that's what did it. He also taught me another thing as an educator. I was in his was a drafting class, and this was back when you had pencils and paper and drafting machines. And I was sitting there looking at my drawing, and I had my pencil like this, and I was looking down at my drawing, and I was getting really, really angry. This is another day, by the way. And I pushed down so hard on the top of my pencil that the top snapped off and flew towards the front of the class. And this is why I don't play the lottery is Mr. Schroeder was walking right down the aisle as my pencil top was flying, and I can still see the little pink mark on his cheek from where it hit him. And he
Oh,
looked at me and he looked down, and he picked up the end of the pencil and he said, "Where's the other side, other part of the pencil?" And I handed him the broken piece. He said, "Did you ever realize that once you break a pencil, you can never put it back together again the same way?" And I looked at him and I knew he wasn't talking about pencils. By the way, I wasn't quite sure. Years later, I went to his house to introduce my wife and things like that to him. And he said, "Do you remember we talked about a pencil once?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I remember the pencil." Um, by the way, this is in Toy Jeeps, I don't know if it's a autobiography or what. I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you ever figure out what I meant?" And I said, "Well, I've thought about it over the years, and I think you meant relationships." And he smiled and he said, "Exactly." I said, frankly, I was too scared at the moment to try to figure out what you were saying. So anyway, to go back to where we were going, as I said, I can go off the weeds real quickly here. I've seen through all of this that when students come into my class and they're struggling, I have something I call a personal situation card. And it's a 3x5 card. I think I might have one here. I'm not sure. No, I don't. Um, can you hear me okay?
yes.
Okay. I get 3x5 cards and I give it to my students. And I tell them this is your personal situation card. On one side of it, it says personal situation, and I put that on there. On the other side, it's blank. And I tell them if you ever have an overwhelming situation in your life, I want you to come up to my podium. And by the way, that's it right back there. Um, and I want you to put the PS card on my podium. That will be a signal to me that you're struggling with something. And I tell them I'll always ask you three questions. The first question is, are you safe? Now, 90 some odd percent of the time, the answer is yes. The second one is, what can I do to help you get through this rough moment? And oftentimes it's like, well, homework's due Friday and Thursday night's my grandmother's funeral, that sort of a thing. And I would say, well, how about we kick your homework over to Monday? That way you can get this clear through your life a little bit here. Um, and the third question usually is, I'm here, or not a question, but a statement is, I'm here if you ever need to talk about it. And so I created that system, and I believe it was very successful. I believe, as you mentioned at the beginning of your broadcast here, I was State Teacher of the Year for California. I think this has a major reason why, is the students really knew that I understood their lives. My first principal, Larry Yagoian, always told me, and it's a quote we've read in school and all, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So as you can see, I'm passionate about this, but the trauma is there in the students, it's in the teachers. I've had teachers come to school and I'm like, "Are you okay?" And they're like, "Well, my wife left me this morning." And you're here. And I've seen them struggle with their class. And I'm like, "You might have been better off taking a day off today." And so you see, trauma is just infused into every classroom. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
I think it does, yeah. At what point did you start your doctorate?
Um, I started getting it together in 2009, and took a class or two, and then formally enrolled in 2010 at Northeastern University in Boston. And strangely enough, some of my professors, I think Dr. Ray McCarthy was one of them, um, and I'd heard this when I'd worked on my master's too, was identify your research early, as early as possible in your program. Find something that interests you. And then each class, use it to build your lit review, to build your reading, whatever you need to do to grow what you're trying to do. So when you get to the research classes, if you remember those, you've really gone a long way. And I did that. Um, when I was a new teacher, I was shot at once, and they missed. I'm glad that young man had it was a lousy shot. I remember I had to throw a couple of kids down because they were near me, and I saw what was happening. Heard a bullet
Was
go
this was
by.
a student that shot?
Yeah,
Was he intending to shoot you?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And it's weird, he didn't even really know me, so it was like,
Really? Oh,
yeah,
wow. We're
long.
talking about trauma. Wow, that's
Oh yeah, yeah.
through
In
that.
fact, that was almost my last year of teaching. My wife
Yeah,
was
yeah.
so stressed about that. She was like,
Amazing you survived that. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's
it was. So I had always been aware of the impacts of school shootings. And I had been in a seminar, and I think it was 2009. And there was another teacher there. And I don't know, I was chatting with her or something like that. And I found out she had been in a school shooting. And they didn't shoot at her, they shot one of her students. And she witnessed this horrible scene. I won't even describe it. And we talked. And when I was in my first class, the professor's name was Jennifer Duffy. And she had an assignment where she actually took a scenario about a school shooting and asked us to talk about the ethics. And that was the class was ethics of the situation. And we could take it from the shooter's point of view or take the ethics from the victim's point of view. And I went up to her and I said, how about the teacher? The teacher was there witnessing it too. And she said, oh, I'll tell you what, if you do a quick study for me, see what else has been done, maybe we'll go with that. So I went through the Northeastern libraries. I think it was Google Scholar back then, and I couldn't find anything about what teachers went through during a school shooting. So I wrote my final paper on that, and I talked to a couple other professors and decided that's what I'm going to dig into. And so every class thereafter, and I graduated in 2013, I did more and more, expanded this. I would go to each of my professors and say, here's my topic. Could I use whatever we're doing to also bring something in? Because I have this really neat idea that no matter what research you're doing, everything can be brought in. Like we were talking about organizational systems. And I thought, well, the way that the principal in the organization treated the teacher afterwards had an effect. And so the professor was like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Go with that, dig into that. So every class, I did that. Of course, the biggest amount of research was into trauma, PTSD, and things like that. So that's through the time I interviewed, I don't remember, 14 to 18 teachers who'd witnessed school shootings. And I decided to do a narrative comparison. I found two teachers who were middle school teachers, and both of them had witnessed school shootings. One of them had gotten through it and finished his career. The other one, the woman that I had told you about, she's now still permanently emotionally disabled, on disability every month. And I thought, why would one successfully get through it? And why was the other one, in fact, what's sad is the other one lost her marriage, became estranged from her children. I mean, the impact was horrific. And I thought, I want to compare these two to see, is there anything we can learn here? And I certainly did. And I went in with one view of what caused her to quit. And at the end, at my defense, I realized I had completely done a 180 and found completely different results than I expected. It's more like an algebraic formula. I thought, oh, it's just that the principal treated her poorly. But yet that was one little portion of the formula. What was her trauma history from her childhood? What was his? And what was this? Did she have a supportive family? Did he? And things like that. So I see it more of an algebraic expression now as to why people are able to get through things. The one thing I've learned about trauma, I've learned a bunch, but is you feel very alone when you go through a trauma. And one of the healing things you can do is to make sure people don't feel isolated and alone. They feel understood. They feel cared for in spite of what happened to them. And I found that was a critical issue too. So anyway, that's kind of the story of my doctoral journey there.
Wow. So you went in already thinking about trauma. That was something that you were experienced with. It was something you had thought about and even written about, and then found yourself in a dissertation, a research project that again focused on that.
Yeah, I look back now at my advanced age, and I realize that I've had a thread throughout my life. Unfortunately, that thread is trauma. Um, and I thought, well, I'll try to make something out of this. I'll try to, educate people about what's going on. What can we do to help these people? It's kind of like this is what I was served. I was served a plate full of lemons, so I'm going to try to make the proverbial lemonade. And I realized that it has affected the direction of my life. Even before I started, I mean, I took educational psychology for my teaching credential, and that really awakened me. And then through all the years of teaching, I started just seeing it. Every year I'd be at the end of the year saying, I thought I'd heard the worst trauma last year. This year up one ups that one. And I thought mine was the worst and from years before. And I came to realize that this is a huge problem that we just don't seem to be wanting to address. And by the way, my book, Teaching After Witnessing a School Shooting, documents all this. And people said, whoa, there's a powerful subject. But the thing is, it's not a bestseller because like who wants to read that?
It's terrible news, right? It's just,
it's not fun. By the
no,
way,
no, it's,
I put a framed story in it of somebody calling someone and using sections of my dissertation to explain the questions that the person on the call. So I tried to make it a little more human. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but
That sounds like my I have a poetry collection of animal abuse poems. Not popular. Nobody wants to read about that. So
but
uh,
I think I've gotten a lot of response on it. There's one academic site. It's the #2 downloaded paper, my dissertation, in this ed psych site that I use. And it's been there for 11 years now. It's still #2. So
nice.
I know there's great interest. I get messages all the time asking questions about school shootings. And, because of this, as I said, I call it a dissertation tangent. I've gone off, I get trauma was the tangent. Now it's become the center. But I also went off into why do kids do this? And one of the things my research showed me was you hear stories of, well, he was just a normal kid. I don't know why he did this. Well, more and more we're finding out that that's not, that's a superficial perception. That case, I believe it's in Michigan, where the parents were arrested and charged and just convicted for second-degree manslaughter because they saw their young son had severe mental problems and they allowed him easy access to a gun. And they even, I think, had a recording, I don't remember exactly, of him calling and saying, well, they caught me, sending these messages. And the message from the mother was, well, just don't get caught. And so I came to realize that we have a broken family systems in this country, and we've got to address that. We have parents working 2, 3 jobs. You understand what we're all both doing these things. And that pulls us away from our relationship connections because we're so focused on the material financial needs of our family that we don't have the time to sit and spend time. I'm not a believer in quality time. Yeah, I've had to use it. I'm a believer in, being available time. Um, does my son or daughter think that I'm available, that I'll listen to them? So my research brought me to that. So you see, when you're done with your dissertation, I just realized I wasn't done. I just all of a sudden opened up a door with numerous other paths in the forest that I could travel down. So
Well, I think a very important and rewarding subject there. The dissertation became the book.
Yes.
Okay.
Um, I don't know, was it 2019? Um, I posted on social media that my grandson had been at a school that had a shooting, and that overwhelmed me. I mean, yeah, I was shot at. Yeah, I talked, but my grandson, it was like still. Um, and I posted on social media that this bothered me, and I talked about my dissertation. And one of the deans at Northeastern called me. He said, "Why the heck haven't you published that as a book?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, it's very difficult. It's a subject that I was in for so many years that it's not an easy subject to work with." And she said, "If I find you a publisher, will you do it?" And I said, "Yes, I will," because of my grandson. In fact, the book is dedicated to Adam. And and to all other kids that have had to go through this. And I've seen the impact on my grandkids because of that. And so the book was published on April 20th, 2021. They wanted that date because that's the anniversary of Columbine
Oh, wow. Of all
in
days.
1999, which
Yeah,
I was a teacher that year. And I remember the next day my attendance was down by over 50%.
I
So
bet.
this topic
Yeah.
is an elephant in a room that we don't even go in the room, let alone deal with the elephant. It's a tough one, not an
And
easy.
every time it happens, it just shakes the whole country.
And every time it happens, I get some kind of media email or phone call. I've been on CNN, Huffington Post, things like that. And they're all asking generally the same question. I've come up with a new answer recently. I guess I can reveal it here. Um, People are saying, well, it's the guns. Well, it's the video games. Well, they have all these reasons. But there's another psychological reason that my readings are pointing me towards. In this country, and I believe January 6th is a testimony to this, we see violence as a valid answer to conflict. We believe, I think there's something in our national psyche that says, go out and hit, shoot, or run somebody down is okay. I think that's horrible, but I think that's the real elephant that is in the middle of the room. People say, "Oh, it's mental illness." They have mental illnesses in other countries, but what makes us a little more unusual is our country seems to um, deify violence. And as I said, this is really new for me. I'm just reading about this, and I'm very concerned about it. Until we get to the fact that violence is okay, we're really never going to change much. That's the psychological issue for me.
I saw that in Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine film. That's what out of spending a whole film about guns, I think at the end of the film you realize that there's something else cultural that he's uncovering himself. He wasn't aware going into it, probably.
No, I think none of us who really have jumped into understanding this. Um, I think I talked to two other psychologists who are into research into violence, and both of them have said we don't want to look at this part of our culture. In a way, we sort of love violence, and he said you'll get vehement denial on that, but he said I'm not so sure it's invalid. I think we may like violence a little too much. So.
Where do you think it comes from?
Um, oh, this is another track I went down. We have this toxic masculinity running hard in our society. I mean, I was always a sensitive kid and got made fun of because I remember one time finding a hurt baby bird, and it really emotionally upset me when I was in elementary school. And I remember kids laughing at me. What you must be a girl or something like that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a boy. Um, but it's almost like only girls can have emotions of compassion and empathy that boys aren't allowed to have that. Um, there was a psychologist in World War II. I think his name was Gilbert, He was asked at the end of the war during the Nuremberg trials to study and interview not the Nazi leaders and from a psychological perspective. And he did. He spent a couple of years, I believe, talking to them and amassed amazing diaries. And someone interviewed him, says, "What could you tell us about the nature of evil from all the interviews that you've done?" And he said, "I think if you want to boil it down, evil is the lack of empathy. It's the lack of the ability to see that other people are people." And I think that there is something, by the way, we're not Nazis. I'm not saying that. But I think there's something in our society that looks down upon us having empathy for those who are weaker. We have a very much a pecking order sort of a system. And I think that's what the struggle is. I remember reading something that said, you can judge a man by how he treats the janitor at his work. And Albert Einstein used to say he treated the maintenance person the same way he treated the president of Princeton University. I think there is a clue about, what we don't see other people as being like ourselves. And I'd like to see that change. So
Has that been historically ingrained in us through
it
the
has. I think, and I don't think it's purely an American problem. I think you could say it's a human problem. And I think in Western Europe, we've seen a lot of it. I think this doctrine of discovery, I don't know if you're familiar with that. The idea of wherever the Europeans went, they just stuck the flag in the ground and that became their territory. Not realizing that, well, hey, aren't those people over there already here? And it's a sense of, well, the strong will survive. We're stronger, therefore we're better. And I think that goes a long way back in society. And
colonialism
oh
and
yeah, yeah,
back to the
yeah,
founding of the country? Yeah.
yeah. And you can go, in the push west, the westward
Mexican
journey.
Memorial. Yeah.
This is our manifest destiny, they called it.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying it was all bad, but I'm just saying we oftentimes didn't want to look at the fact that we didn't see people as people. And I'm concerned about that still. To wrap that up, yep.
Yes. Have you conversed with any student victims?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, I
That wasn't part of the focus, though, of the book.
no,
The book
but
was more focused on the teachers.
by the way, the other nonfiction book I have is I don't know how to put it together yet, but the idea is I've talked to a lot of people, and I would just like to put together a list of stories that I heard from a whole variety, parents who are waiting outside the school in a panic attack, kids who are in a closet scared, other teachers, administrators, the school secretary, police officers. We don't realize that they have to go into the school and see the effects of this. So I have a whole bunch of vignettes, as I call them, or stories from all these people that I'm trying to find a way to mold that into some sort of cohesive book where we can all see there are threads that unite everybody, no matter what their situation was. And yet there are differences between each one. High school kids, developmentally in psychology, as you're growing up, there's more impact of things that happen to you when you're younger. And so little kids seeing things like that, it'd be a lot harder for psychiatrists to work through that. Hopefully they get help very quickly. Whereas adults, by the way, I'm not saying it's not traumatic for adults. It's just that we have a prefrontal cortex that we're able to take in and understand what happened, as horrific as it was. And we could work with psychiatrists to heal from that. Kids don't fully understand things. They just know the horror, the younger kids, and it gets manifested in ways that we never realize, like becoming more easily agitated, or having a hard time sitting still, or unsure about being left alone. All these little things the variety of kids go through who've experienced these things. Um, I've only talked with one student who actually was severely shot during a school shooting, and that I'm going to be honest, that was emotionally difficult for me. That was a roller coaster. That's the one I'm having the hardest time writing down. I can still hear his voice. So, yeah.
So this would be another book, a collection of stories from those people you've spoken to
I
about.
believe there's value if I can, all this stuff I did during my dissertation, took tons of notes, contacts, information that I didn't use. But then one day I was looking through all my uh, digital files and realizing there's a message here. Um, as I said, I'm grappling with how do I put it all together. But I think I would like to do that. Um, because the neat thing is if you look at all these stories, maybe those of us who haven't been in one of these things will all of a sudden start to understand these people, that it humanizes the people who had to go through school shootings. And it's not, oh, that's crazy, that's weird. It's, oh, I understand a little better about why these people are struggling. My whole goal would be, please be compassionate to people who seen this kind of trauma, any trauma, really. I've had people, oh, I can't tell you how many times people said to me, well, why can't you just get over trauma? Um, as I said below, it's because it's been really hard coded in the lower levels of the brain. And it's not something that I call it the flinch. If you saw something being thrown at you, you would just, but you see, your prefrontal cortex does not think, oh, look, there's a rock coming at my head. What should I do? No, that what I'm talking about is down low. Your limbic system just goes, that it's a
So
subliminal
reflex.
reflex. And the trauma does that to us. It makes the lower part of the brain, my amygdala, because of all the trauma I went through as a kid, must look like Superman, because it's ready at all times. And I tell people it's because we've got to find a way to calm the limbic system down, to make it, a lot of us who've been through trauma don't, I know this may sound weird, we don't know what it feels like to feel safe. It's that simple. This is why I call myself a Besselite. Bessel van der Kolk is doing a lot of research he's an MD psychiatrist, and he's doing a lot of research in the effects of psychedelics on treating this. And they have found stunning results on ketamine and MDMA therapy, which is a drug you take and you go through with a psychiatrist, certain therapeutic exercises. And they found radical changes for people who no other treatment could fix this. But they're getting pushback because of the 60s psychedelic stuff. And medical insurance companies are, oh, this is a little weird. But they're getting studies now that show radical improvement using these drugs. I had one ketamine session once just because I injured myself, and he said, I'm going to give you an injection of ketamine. And I had been reading about this. I went, oh, now I can experience ketamine. And the one thing that made me realize this is going to work is I'm a frightened person. If I go to the emergency room where I was, I'm in a near panic state. And I felt the drug, and I felt well, there were colors. It was really interesting. And I remember thinking, oh, this must be what it feels like to die. Now, that normally would cause me to have a panic attack right there. But then I went, wait, the very next thought was, I don't, I feel calm. I'm okay. And I went, oh, this is what calm feels like. And when I came out of the emergency room procedure, the doctor came over and he knew that I was studying trauma psychology. And he said, have you heard that they're trying ketamine for trauma? And I said, yeah, now I understand. He said, what do you mean? And I explained what I just told you. And he said, I get it. something that the experience of death is right in front of you, or the fear of it, but yet you're calm. I said, so what I'm thinking is in therapy, the psychiatrist can give you ketamine or MDMA and you're calm, and then you could talk about the trauma. That allows the prefrontal cortex to deal with some of these things because everything's been calmed down. Because you see, most of the time, if you're talking about things that happened to me when I was a kid, I'm agitated, I'm alert, and you can't work very well. Anyway, again, I talk so much. You're so kind, Bill. Thanks for listening to me.
We are in a deficit of calmness. It is hard to find these days.
I
So
like a statement that said in Ed Psych we have that when you see a child who's in a panic, don't get pulled into his panic, pull him into your calm. Now that's easier said than done, but I've used that in my classroom for years. The idea when I see a young person panicking, I first start regulating myself. By the way, those of us who've dealt with trauma learn that there are two keys. One is to regulate. Okay, I'm feeling this. Calm down, find a baseline. The other thing is to reframe. So a young person may be very overwhelmed, they're feeling agitated, whatever's going on. And the first thing I'll work with them in doing is saying, hold on, look at me, let's calm together. And it may take a while. Okay, you're doing okay. I'm here for you. They're not alone. Now help me understand what you're going through. And then you repeat what they say to you so they hear you say it. And then you talk about, okay, maybe it's not exactly as we see things. Oh, what do you mean? And so we'll talk that way. And I said, well, this doesn't fix the problem. But the first key is that with teenagers, absolutely, find them a way to get them to regulate, to bring the emotional distress down. Then you can work with it. I've been worked in teacher prep programs for many years teaching ed psych. And I said, when you see a kid agitated, angry, and doing stuff in your classroom, you're not going to get anywhere until you bring that agitation down. If you just get sucked into it, I like what you just said. I think our society, we need to bring that panic into our calm a little more. I see so many people anxious, scared. I'll admit I have struggles too. But I think those of us who are compassionate can find ways to bring our calm to those around us. No, I may not be able to bring it to someone in Minnesota, but maybe my neighbor, maybe the person at my school or something like that. You'll have students, you see them, and maybe you bring them a little of your calm. You have done a great thing for our society by doing that little thing right there. I think right now our society needs more calmness. Yes.
would agree. Yes.
I sound like I'm preaching.
Well, teachers go through so much trauma to begin with, even regardless of their personal life. They go to work. Most people think teachers have a summer off and they're relaxing on a beach somewhere. Most of them are working a second or third job all year
Yep,
round. They're grading, they're dealing with parents, they're dealing with administrators, they're dealing with the kids and all the emotions in there and the hormones and
yep,
everything else. And then add to their own personal lives that trauma that they bring to the room from the
true.
past and as you noted, present. And then add in the equation of school shootings, things like that, external threats. And
Also, there's a new thing in the last decade I've seen is people are scared to teach certain things. I was a history teacher. I'm licensed, as I said, in science and social studies, but I've known some of my colleagues are scared to teach about the Civil War and slavery because of certain, people are saying, oh, you're teaching critical race theory. Well, no, we're teaching history.
yeah, wow,
Um,
what
and
confusion.
there's some religious people. When I taught, I've forgotten which science I taught, probably earth science, and talked about the Earth being 4.6 billion years old. I got called in front of the principal. No, it's only 6 or 7. I forgot how many thousands of years old. And I'm like, listen, this is what the science is telling us. Well, then, so you see every single one. Oh, and like your field, I believe, English literature. Um, if there's an author who's really good but happens to be gay, or another one who's a black poet or something like that, and she's really good. Wonder how many teachers are saying, I really want to bring this is powerful stuff into my classroom, but oh my gosh, will I get hit for that sort of a thing? And we're seeing, I think the last 10 years, we've seen that more than ever before.
And teachers are exhausted. I mean, here in North Carolina, we're known as first in flight for for the airplane and all that history, but they say it's first in flight for teachers too, because they come in, they get that first job, and they teach for a year or two, and they're just exhausted, and they leave. And I think we have the quickest turnover rate in the whole country. They're
It's
gone.
spreading
Pay is
nationally.
low. I mean, it's just terrible, terrible conditions,
In
and
states, I know in my Colorado, they're allowing people without teaching licenses to teach
yes,
because
here too. Yeah.
one of the reasons when I was a professor of education and COVID kind of sent a torpedo into my career is teachers started leaving the teacher prep program because they were overwhelmed. And we're just now starting to see it coming back. But that gives us a 5-year gap of unprepared teachers. And then these young people are seeing the pay isn't great. You're getting blamed. Um, Dr. Barbara Ty was one of my professors when I was working on my teaching license. She said something that I've never forgotten. She said, schools are a mirror of society. So whatever we're struggling with in our schools are not because of the teachers. It's because the kids are bringing the struggles of their homes into the classroom. And I've seen it over the years so much that parents, coming in saying, well, you did this, you did this. I'm like, well, let's work together for the best of your children. But young teachers find it difficult to have, and I remember having difficulty with that. When a parent comes in pointing the finger, saying, you're messing my kid's life up. I had a parent early in my career came in and said, because of you, my son is never going to go to Harvard. And well, first of all, I didn't know he wanted to go to Harvard. Second of all, he got earned an A in my class. I'm so confused here. I want to die. Um, and she said, no, you got to be rougher on him. You should have given him a C. And, my background ed psych says you can demoralize a kid so much that they give up. That young man graduated high school and never stepped foot into a college classroom ever again. He became, I can't remember what it was, EMT or electrical technician or something like that, which is fine. But he just said, I was so pressured, so dominated that I wanted nothing more to do with school after. So I didn't blame myself anymore for him not going to Harvard or any other, North Carolina State or anywhere else, because we don't see that we burn kids out. This is another one of my passions is kids. My number one goal as a teacher is that they're more excited about learning when they leave my classroom than when they came in. I think we should judge teachers more on that than on these ridiculous test scores. So, but
At the
that's my,
college level, it's student evaluations.
yes.
Yeah, it's different things at different levels, and
And it's the same with that.
yeah.
And when I taught college, I would say, if you can put down that I opened your eyes to something, I made you interested and excited about learning, that to me is what my reward. And I have a lot of my evaluations on my website from teaching university level. And I point them to people. I said, if you read those at edwardmooney.net, you will see a thread, a theme of he was passionate. I look forward to being in his class. I told my future teachers, if kids want to be in your classroom, 90% of your battle is won
That's it.
right
You've won.
there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, and they'll give you the responses you need. But I love what you just said about the teachers are worn down. That enthusiasm gets sucked out of us because of all the petty little garbage that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we're like, how do I get enthused enough to go in front of my class and talk about William Shakespeare today? I found tricks that work for me. I'm still a learner and I always start my classes. Do you know what I just saw on the internet about what we're talking about? Look at, is this weird or what? If you go to my website and look on my links page, you'll see something called the Cheddar Man. And there's an example of that. It's a thing where in 1903, I think it was, some middle school kids ditched school and they went to explore in Cheddar, England. They found a cave. And they went in there, and in the back of the cave was a skeleton, a human skeleton. And by the way, I usually do this right before the period ends just for drama. And they were scared. So they ran to the police. They showed the police. The police said, oh, this one is way out of our jurisdiction time-wise. So a university archaeology department said, this is thousands of years old. Well, fast forward 100 years, and the biologists are looking at the skeleton in the lab, and they extract DNA, and they do a DNA analysis, and one of the biologists laughs and says, well, we should notify the next of kin. And they're all laughing, and one says, that's a really good idea. So what are you talking about? We just dated it at 9,000 years old. And the biologist said, why don't we go to Cheddar, England, get some blood samples from people willing to donate, do DNA scans, see if we can find a descendant of this guy. Well, they went to Cheddar, England. They got a government grant to do this. A lot of people volunteered. They came in, gave a little bit of blood. They found a relative, a descendant. And usually right about now, the bell rings in my class. And so the kids are like, who, what was it? What was it? And I go, well, you know what? If you go home and find the answer, I'll give 10 points to your team tomorrow. Every kid seems to have the answer the next day. And the answer is they found a man who was in the town, who was a teacher, 100 and some odd years later, at that same middle school that the boys attended. He was not alive back then, but they found out that he taught in the same school that those boys had ditched school from. His name is Adrian Target, and he wrote a book. And so I have it over there on my shelf, and I'll wave that
Amazing.
around.
Wow.
So I do those kinds of, so I tell students, if at the end of the year, you're like, I'm so excited about learning, I've done my job. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
anyway, as I said, you see why my mother said I should be a teacher? I like to teach.
A natural teacher. Yes. Well, you're back for one more moment on the book, teaching after witnessing a school shooting. That was the dissertation.
Yes.
Like you, my dissertation became a book, and then I had a leftover lots of ideas, like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying, and I kind of
Mm-hmm.
patched that together. I updated
Yep.
some research and put that in, made it a more accessible book for people that were just interested in psychology, and they didn't have to be a scholar
Right.
to read it and enjoy it. Um, is your book accessible through the mainstream population?
Oh yeah.
More scholarly?
No,
Was
you
it
can get it on
altered a little bit
Amazon.
from the original state?
Yeah, what I did, I read through it and I thought, who would want to read this? But then I thought, if I cased it in a story. And so what I did is I like when my writing style is a framed story, start in the present, go back in the past, come back to the present. So I started this with myself, I'm making a phone call. I'm looking for someone. And this person says, oh yeah, I know where that person is. Why do you want to talk to her? And so, well, I did this study and she was very important in the study. I said, what study? So I start talking. And so I broke up my 5 chapters into mini chapters. And in between, I came back to the phone call and we talked. And she'd ask me another question, which of course led into the next mini chapter. And so I tried to write it so that people could, some sort of plot or I'm leading towards something. And sure enough, the last chapter of the Peter Lang book is there's a message. and a theme that is, shows itself at the last chapter of the book. And I've gotten positive reviews from people who aren't scholars saying it was really easy to read, because I'm going, no, I want to know the answer to that question. And he said, when I realized, oh, what he did is he took parts of his dissertation to answer. He first drilled the question into my brain, and then his dissertation was presented as the answer.
Nice approach. Nice approach.
I, the publisher was like, we've never done anything like that before. I said,
Yeah.
oh, well, why not?
Slightly altered. Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't make it more fun to read, but I think it flows better that way. People, get a feeling for it. And one other thing that I've been doing since that book is I've been doing lectures at universities about, I call it dissertation tangents, and about how since I finished that, I have been studying trauma psychology. And I've done seminars. I did one at our Northeastern, um, where I had the doctoral students bring in their dissertation topics. And I said, now, first of all, time out. This is for after you defend and finish. Let's go through your dissertation and talk about what tangents do you see that made you think, ooh, I want to go in that direction. Oh, that was very interesting. And I encourage them, I show them my process on how to farm or harvest all of your notes, your lit reviews, everything. I still have them on a disc here somewhere. Um, and say, ooh, there's a theme. So I started trying to say, what is this trauma stuff? I think I know it, but I want to know it better. And I've thought of, as you and I have talked, writing a book, bringing together all those stories of other people that I talked to. And there's another tangent, but I believe that every dissertation shouldn't be the end point. You should be opening doors that you're in the forest going, my goodness, I could go over to that mountain, or I could go down that river there. And oh my goodness, I found all kinds of new things. And
A
I'm very
lifetime of
excited about that.
possibilities. Yeah.
Yes. And,
And
and
for
it,
others, if you're me, maybe you just want to close the door on that.
yeah, yeah.
And move away, far, far away and
Well,
explore
the
other
people do,
things.
but I tell people like that are like, is there not one thing in there that made you go, that was interesting? And we had some seminars at Northeastern, and I couldn't believe, I had many of the students were like, I just want to be done with it. I said, that's why I said, put it aside. Just look at it from a fresh view. And I remember one young lady was talking about, oh, I've forgotten what the topic was, uh, people in middle school who weren't getting fed or didn't have enough food or something like that. And I said, though, that's a heavy duty topic, yes. And she said, and there's something that I wondered about was, couldn't teachers bring nutritious food and just, and I said, okay, now you're heading in a different direction. You're heading in maybe something that could later solve that question of how does it affect the kids. And so all of a sudden she said, oh, I found something hopeful in my research. I don't know what she's done with it, but, or has, if she has, but the lectures I do are about, even if you're tired of it, there's something. And I'm telling people, you don't think I wasn't tired about school shootings? But I found that there were tidbits, nuggets that I didn't notice the first time I went through. It may be, I remember there was one book that I'd read that I only took like a little snippet out of. And I said, well, that's interesting. And when I took my notes, I'd put little asterisks next to it. And what that meant was there was something there that was interesting, but I'm focused on finishing the degree. And I told them, start doing that. Um, it's a little bookmark, if you will, of go back and look at that later. And so I'm very enthusiastic about it. It's sad to me. I'd like to be able to teach university again, to be able to do, I just gave you a lesson. You're my colleague. But one of the fun things is I'm always pushing Bessel's book, The Body Keeps the Score. It will change your life for anyone who's had trauma. I met him in person. I've talked to him a number of times. I met him in person once, and he signed my copy of his book. And then I took my book and I opened it up to a certain page, one of the the bibliography, and there it was Vanderkolk B. And he laughed, and I said, "Could you sign under your reference here?" And he did. He said, "I've signed a lot of books, but this is the first time I've signed another person's book with my name in it."
Nice one. Yeah, I like that.
But I really, if there's one thing, I may not, I don't know if I'm saying much that's of value, but for those of people who've been traumatized, please read Bessel's book. You don't have to buy it. Go to the library and check it out. I've always told people, if you're struggling, but you've got serious trauma you're struggling with, contact me and I'll find a way to get a copy of the book to you somehow. I know Bessel's mostly interested in people uh, finding healing, and his book gives you clues to that, quite big clues. So anyway, that's the end of my little speech.
That's an important message, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So
On the more casual recreational reading side, before we go, you want to just tell us a little bit about your fictional books? Like the
okay,
Pearls of the Stone Man and that trilogy?
The Pearls of the Stone Man is about a retired teacher. He's living in a retirement community, and he noticed that there are a lot of teenagers have nothing to do, and they're causing problems. Teens who are unsupervised. The parents are gone working all the time, and he also noticed that the retired people in the community are always complaining that they need somebody to fix this or do that. And so he comes across some young people who are struggling or in trouble. I'm trying not to give too much of the plot away. And because of his wife, he kind of takes them under his wing. And there's a plot, there's things happen. I don't want to go into it very much. It was translated into Japanese.
Beautiful.
I call this a book that I wrote that I can't read. Um, and then in 2015, it was made into a movie in Japan. And this man won Best Actor in Japan for this role. So I'm very proud of that. I do have a copy of the Japanese movie with the English subtitles. If you'd ever like to see it, I can send you a private link. And I've had people watch it who said those people did an amazing job acting the story out. It's amazing. I've also, there are two other books to that. It's a trilogy. The Journey of the Stone Man is the second book. And what I did is I went back like 20 some odd years before the main setting of this book. And in this book, there's a tension between father and son. If you go back 20 some odd years, kind of gets to the nature of why there's the tension there. And then the third book is called The Hope of the Stone Man. And in this one, you go back many years to when the main character, who's very old in Pearls, is a new father, young father. And then, of course, I like the framed format. So there's a 4-story that gets ended at the end of the third book. But each one you can read as a standalone. So
I enjoyed them. I highly recommend them. So
thank you.
yes,
But
we'll link to all of your site and your books below.
thank you, sir.
I want to thank you for spending this time today with me.
No,
Very important conversation, I think.
me too.
I
I think
appreciate it.
I appreciate you listening. I think what you're doing with these podcasts, if people could bring these kinds of stories to the country, you're doing a great service for all of us. So thank you.
Dr. Edward Mooney Jr.,
Thank you.
thanks so much. Hope to see
Thank
you
you.
again soon.
You too. Take care.